Hi cousin Donald, how are you? It's a beautiful morning here in Surfers Paradise as I look out at the magnificent Pacific Ocean that binds our two countries. I look at all the happy people playing on the sand and I realise how blessed this country is. To all you people out there on the internet, this is Australia. This is America's closest and in many ways most necessary ally. Who are we? We're SWIL Team 4. We're your unofficial transition team, Donald. What we're planning to do, in a month's time, you're going to be the big chief. You're going to be the emperor. You're going to be the chief general, the chief strategist, the chief philosopher, the chief cheerleader, the chief salesman for the greatest civilization the world has ever seen, the United States. The greatest civilization ever. The only civilization that ever led the world and was enormously benevolent to the rest of the world. Now, who are we? Just four ordinary Aussies. We call ourselves SWIL Team 4 because there were four of us. And the boys do like a jar or two on a hot day, you know. And I'm like you, I'm pretty boring. I'm a teetotal and a non-smoker. And also too, Donald, we all love the States. I love this country, Australia, with a passion. And while we're saying this to you, we want you to succeed. We're enormously impressed with what you've done so far, but we have some strategies that we think may be of enormous help to you. Who are the four of us? One of my friends is a world famous designer, very modest fellow, but great analytical mind. Two of my other friends are decorated ex-military officers who have served in various conflicts with the US Army and Air Force and retain a very high regard for them. So we're all Americanophiles, and where we're valuable to you is that America's a vast society and America always analyses itself from within. It doesn't analyse itself from without. Now look at us as sort of, we're going to be like that kid who ran beside the emperors in Roman times. Kept saying, remember sir, you're mortal, remember sir, you're mortal. And also, you're going to be the big general in the heat of the battle. And we're going to be your observers on a distant hill, as all generals always did in years gone by. Now, let's look at our common origins. Firstly, Donald, we're related. Now, you are related to the most famous, probably the most famous Scottish clan in America, and we're all related, actually. I'm related to you, I'd be some sort of sixth cousin. Now, your mother was MacLeod. And when I looked at a picture on the internet, she had my mother's jawline, my mother's eyes, same sort of hair as my mother and sisters. And my family were mercenary soldiers on the Isle of Skye for 300 years, and your family were the MacLeods of Skye. There weren't even more than a few thousand people there. Possibly our great-great-whatever grandfathers went on raids together. You know, terrible people, the Highlanders, but terribly clever people. Now, firstly, we understand you in some ways probably better than people in your own country, because Australia is a country full of have-a-go people who'll have a go at anything, and if they fail, they say, oh, what the hell? So that's the sort of people we are. Until World War II, 50% of Australians, and probably more than 50% of New Zealanders, were Scottish or Irish. Now, there were never more than 200,000 Highlanders in the world. And the impact that the Scots and Irish have had on Australia, New Zealand, Canada, USA, the most desirable countries anyone ever wants to migrate to, is massive. Before we go any further, I'd like to examine a famous Scottish Highland American family. Now, 40 years ago, a fellow called John Donald MacArthur died. He was the second or third richest man in the US. He was sort of the Warren Buffett of his day. It's hot work here in Surfers, giving a lecture on American history to Americans. He was a fascinating character. Donald, he made you look like a choir boy. He was a chain smoker, heavy drinker, received officials in the nude while he boiled eggs. But when he died, he left a fortune because he didn't want to give the US government to a foundation, which has already given out $6 billion to various charities. So he was outstanding. His brother was a famous playwright. Another brother, I think, was a famous banker. They were just sheer star quality. Now, fast forward a bit, and we're going to talk about this fellow later on. General Douglas MacArthur, the most famous general of the 20th century, apart from Ike, was his first cousin. You know Douglas MacArthur? Medal of Honor winner, as was his father. Top West Point. The man who chased the Japanese back across the islands. Led the brilliant changes in Japan after World War II. That's part of the reason for Japan being such a success as a modern society. And then in the Korean War, I think he was about 70, he did the brilliant Incheon landing that no one else thought was possible. So you have that talent in your genes. If you look them up, they've got to be cousins of yours. And John Donald MacArthur in Australia was the fellow who found our wool industry. He was eccentric and mad and a typical Highlander as well. But, you know, Australia rode on the sheep's back from 1800 till the Korean War, 150 years. So that's just one family of sheer raw talent. Now, because we're Highlanders, one of my friends and I, we're 100% Highlander, Don. I think we understand you pretty well. See, I have a fierce love of Australia. I love this country with all my heart and soul. And if you're a success, it's going to be good for my country. Also, I love America passionately and in a way that you don't know. Because you were born in 1946, you didn't go through the war. I sat in an air raid shelter in 1942 as a tiny boy while my mother cried, while the Japanese dropped bombs all around. And Townsville, a sleepy town, was an American city at the time, and it was incredible. The energy and the purpose of America in World War II was extraordinary. There were trucks rattling everywhere with soldiers. We'd sit on the beach and watch the landing craft land and the jeeps run off and the planes fly overhead. There was an incredible excitement and an energy in the wartime. And this was probably World War II, was when America was at its greatest. And what we'd like to see you do, excuse me, we'd like to see you inject the same energy and sense of purpose and working together in America that was in World War II. That was when America was a really great nation. Now, when I say that, consider what America did in 1 year after Pearl Harbor. Now, when America went into the war, the army was very unprepared. There are only 176,000 soldiers in the US Army, fewer than Portugal. The US in 1940-41 had the 19th largest army in the world. The most powerful economy had the 19th largest army in the world. Of course, you had a pretty good navy and a pretty good air force. We know all that. And when the war started, within 2 years, you had 12 million men under arms. And what America did in that time is incredible. The war was won in the machine shops of America. My God, the production of America. 2,710 Liberty ships, 2 a day were produced in 4 years from 18 shipyards. The Mustang, that brilliant fighter, from day one of first drawing to day one in the air, was 36 days. It wasn't terribly good at first, but with that wonderful fusion between Britain and America, with a Rolls-Royce, I think it was Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the Mustang became a fantastic fighter. So America did incredible things, built 30,000 tanks, supported Britain, supported Russia, did incredible things. And the war wasn't over in a year. But, excuse me again, within a year, here's what happened. Pearl Harbor, December 41. Within 4 months, the Doolittle laid over Tokyo, where many brave Americans lost their life, was an enormous psychological success. Didn't do a lot of damage, but it frightened the hell out of the Japanese. A few months later, General MacArthur was forced to flee the Philippines because the Japanese had overrun the whole of East Asia, Korea, China, the whole way down the peninsula, Malaya, Singapore, Indonesia, the Philippines. And MacArthur fled to his most essential ally, Australia, a first world country. And when he got here, it's something all up like 340,000 Australian troops, including the reservists, and 38,000 American. But he was in charge. Now, hang on to that for a minute, and we'll go back to somewhat earlier than when MacArthur and the Aussies and the Americans defeated the Japanese. In 1942, not much more than 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the British, under General Bernard Montgomery, won the seminal battle in the Western Desert against the German army, a fantastic army under the Desert Fox, General Rommel. Now that was the Brits with the Aussies and the Kiwis and the New Zealand and the Maori battalion and the South Africans and I think some Greek and French units, I'm not sure. But they didn't do it on their own. They were already supplied with Sherman tanks. I read this the other day. One of my uncles, by marriage, had his British tanks replaced with Sherman tanks in that very battle. Now, the Desert Fox was beaten. This was the first defeat of the German army. The Afrika Korps surrendered next year. So within 6 months of Pearl Harbor, Britain and America working together gave the German army its first bloodied nose, its first defeat. Let's get back to Australia. MacArthur at the Battle of Milne Bay, which was a battle fought by Australian infantry and American engineers and I think American air support, for the first time turned back the mighty Japanese army who hadn't been beaten in 5 years. That was the seminal battle, and Japan never won another. And of course General MacArthur island hopped the whole way to Japan, and the immortal Harry Truman, rated 5th best president of all time, an extraordinary man. He was the man who pulled the plug on the atom bombs, and a dreadful thing, but probably saved hundreds of thousands of both American and Japanese lives. All this happened within less than a year. There were 2 fantastic naval battles. The Coral Sea. I will always be grateful to the Battle of the Coral Sea because my life and my family's life were directly saved. Australia was wide open. The Japanese had got to the hills overlooking Port Moresby when all this occurred. And Australian coast watchers with American intelligence found the Japanese fleet in the Battle of the Coral Sea. I won't go into it at length, but 2 carriers, Japanese carriers, were disabled, and the next big Battle of Midway, which was a tremendous American victory, was helped by the Battle of the Coral Sea. Now, one of the main contributors to the Battle of the Coral Sea and the Battle of Midway was Australian heroes. They were called the Coast Watchers. You've probably never heard of them. They were just ordinary civilians, planters on plantations and that sort of thing. And they tugged around these radios that took 16 men to carry it. They had fuzzy wuzzy porters from New Guinea and places like that, and they were chased by the Japanese and often killed by the Japanese. But these brave men provided the essential intelligence at the Battle of the Coral Sea and later to the Battle of Midway. And Guadalcanal was an incredible battle. It hung on a knife's edge for a long time, with both America and Australia fighting it. The Australian Navy fought there. One of our ships is at the bottom of the harbour, and 42 other warships, I think, are at the bottom of the harbour. a titanic battle. But once again, the Aussies and America came through. And Rear Admiral, I think Bull Halsey, probably the most famous admiral of lot, he said, without the Coast Watchers, there would have been no victory at Guadalcanal, and without a victory at Guadalcanal, there would have been no victory in the Pacific. It was in these regions where the incomparable John Fitzgerald Kennedy, wounded, burnt, with his patrol boat shot from under him, swam and dragged a wounded crewman 3 miles through shark-infested waters to the safety of land. A true American hero. Right. So that's how close we were then. And the might and power of the USA in World War II was just incredible. Now, we'll come back to that later, and we'll discuss a strategy that will put you amongst the 4 greatest American presidents of all time. It's a strategy to prevent war for the foreseeable future between the major nations. Now, getting back to history again, in less than a month's time, you're going to be the US president. You're going to be the most powerful man in the world. Can one man make a difference? 2 damn right he could. Now, if we look at history, the best German historians were British. The best military historian in the world, Anthony Beevor, is British. And their books will be read by anyone who's interested in military history. Now, the Germans kept meticulous accounts of what happened. Now, when Britain came into the war before the USA, Hitler, who'd been a soldier in the First War, he'd received 2 Iron Crosses, he'd been gassed, he'd been a runner. But that's a job for a brave man, running between the trenches carrying messages with the snipers lining up on you. So, he might have gone mad later on. I don't think he was mad at the time. What he was trying to do is exactly what Mr. Putin's trying to do. At the moment, he was trying to restore the glory of the Greater Germany, where in 1919, at the Treaty of Versailles, Germany had been very, very harshly treated. Now, when the British came into the war, Hitler had grabbed Hungary, grabbed Austria, grabbed the Sudetenland. He looked absolutely nonplussed, according to A.J.P. Taylor. He turned, I think, to von Ribbentrop and said, "Why now? What do we do now?" Because he knew the British, whom he admired greatly. He admired the British Empire and the way they ran things greatly. He knew there was real trouble ahead. And I think one of the others, Goebbels, or one of his other close ministers, said, "I suppose in the morning we'll be receiving the same ultimatum from France." Britain had delivered an ultimatum: get out of Poland or we declare war as well. Now, let's be just a bit fanciful here. If probably your most outstanding president ever, or second, if FDR had met Hitler at a secret meeting with the British Prime Minister, who I think was Curtin at the time, preferably it would have been Churchill, but it would have been Curtin. If they'd met Hitler and said, "It's not on. We're in this together. You'll be mightily defeated. Don't go ahead. Retreat. Retreat and we'll leave you be where you are." Now, if that had happened, 40 million lives would have been saved. So yes, one man can make a big difference. Now, we know you pretty well because we're fellow Highland people. Now, here's what we know about you, Donald. What we like is you're a bit of a rogue, you're a bit of a chancer, and you're a gambler. Any man with your personal history who goes into public life knows he's going to have everything flung against him. And you won. It was great. It was really, let's have a bit of fun. It was like Rocky won. It was fantastic. You won against all odds. except Hillary didn't look much like that powerful fellow Rocky Fortune. I can't think of his name at the moment, but you know, she flung a lot of ineffectual left hands and then knocked herself out with her own all that ridiculous email stuff. Yeah, you won. It was great. And Apollo Creed, I'm sorry. Hillary made a poor Apollo Creed, and that was brilliant. Now, your training team looked good, but we don't think, your transition team rather, we don't think you've defended your picks very well, all your billionaires. And the other thing you haven't done as yet, you haven't displayed that flashing true intelligence we know you have, Donald. We just know you're as smart as that, but you haven't done that as yet. We love some of your picks. Mad Dog Mathis, great. Would have been terrible if he was called Gender Equity Mathis or Multicultural Diversity Mathis. Would have been a dreadful thing. It was great. And you've got one Aussie on your training team. Well, that's a very good start, Donald, very good start. Andrew Liveris went to Brisbane High School in Brisbane State High, you know, yeah. Scientia potestas is the motto, knowledge is power. You probably need a few more Aussies on your team, Donald. I mean, how about Rupert Murdoch? Now, he took a busted-ass newspaper when he was a kid and he turned into the greatest media empire the world's ever seen. He's 70, he's old enough to be your dad. He's just married to Jerry Hall. He's a bit of a goer, really, isn't he? And why don't you use him as a media advisor? Put a second Aussie on your team. Now, if you're going to do Trump the movie or, you know, Trump the Chronicles, we strongly advise Russell Crowe. He'd do, you know, Gladiator. He'd do you very, very well indeed. Plus, on your transition team, you've got to stop looking within America alone. Because if you look at recent history, George Bush and Barack Obama didn't put that $15 trillion on the US national debt alone. After all, they quadrupled it after Bill Clinton, who was a very good president in many ways, left it at $5 trillion or so. So a lot of your advisors are crap, Donald. They're just no good at all. You've got to look outside. You've got to select. You're a developer. I mean, you know, if an Iranian goat head could bring a development in quicker than anyone else, you'd employ him, wouldn't you? Of course you would. Now, and you really have to look outside. Now, let's do some American history again. A great American, another great American eccentric, you're a bit eccentric, we know, was Henry Ford. Now, Henry Ford was once interviewed and asked why by the, you know, the usual reporters with BAs and skin diving and basket weaving from the Nowheresville Tech, was asked why he let this fellow go, why this fellow had gone to another firm, some high-level Ford executive. Henry Ford didn't know. And when the reporter said, well, sir, was he the Benedict Arnold of Ford? Ford didn't know who Benedict Arnold was, you know. He just looked around. And smart man, picked up. And he said, yeah, well, when they told him Benedict Arnold was a famous American trader, he said, when I want to learn history, I hire me a professor. So you've got a lot of tools over there, but you haven't got a lot of creative thinkers. Now, Henry Ford was also asked in another interview, who were the favourite executives he would employ to run his various companies? And he thought for a while, he was a slow-thinking man, and someone prompted and said, sir, do you like highly intelligent, hard-working people? He said, yeah, sure. He said, I love them. He said, I like them for my number twos. And they said, well, sir, who do you like for your number ones? He said, I like intelligent, lazy men. They said, why is that? He said, because an intelligent, lazy man will always find the fastest and the most efficient way to solve any problem. So he's a great American thinker. And a lot of the advisors in Washington, frankly, need the boot. Now, Donald, before we go further, let's examine who you are. You've done the first bottom-up political revolution in the world for many years. The Make America Great Again movement. Everyone underestimated you. We didn't, because we've only seen one evidence of your flashing intelligence during the whole time. When ISIS was discussed hundreds of times on American TV by all these po-faced people covered in PhDs and long looks, my mates and I were screaming and yelling at the TV bomb their oil, choke their money off. And you were the first person in America I saw when you were asked what to do, you said immediately, bomb their oil fields, cut their income off. Lots of people said it later on, but to my knowledge you were the first. And of course this is the mark, if not of genius, of a first-rate mind, is to look at a problem that looks complex and people yada 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 about forever. You go bang, that's the solution. That's one of the reasons we thought you were very smart. And you haven't, as yet, shown the American public this. What you've been doing, because the left control the narrative on television in America, what you've been doing is fighting the wrong fight in the wrong places with the wrong people. Let me explain myself. Sometimes you fight on the front foot and that's good. You're connecting with the American people directly is fantastic. The energy you've injected into America, superb. You've given the place hope again. You've given it an energy injection. But there's a long way to go, and there's a lot of smart things you could do you haven't done well. Now, let's see what your job involved. Let's talk about you first. We know you're incredibly ambitious. You'd like to be the best international president ever and the best domestic president ever. Okay, fine. We know all that. And we have a strategy to make you the best international president ever. But let's leave that go for the moment. Now, let's look at the qualities we, the world, the people from outside who watch you. A couple 100 million people watch you in America. Billions watch you outside. Now, they see you portrayed as some buffoon with a nuclear bomb in his hand. Now, this is just nonsense. And Donald, you've got to fight these people. And you've got to fight them in a smart way. Because when we examine, I mentioned before, the qualities you've got to have, what you've got to do is go on a quick study. The minor problem is that you don't read much, it's said. But we know you're a quick thinker and a quick learner. Now, you cannot be a highly successful US president unless you know an awful lot about the US presidents. You've just defended your son and his charity, and he's giving up his charity. What nonsense! And your daughter, your lovely daughter and children have just been verbally attacked on a plane by some girly man. Thank you, Arnold Schwarzenegger. Now, you have unconsciously channeled Lyndon Johnson, but you haven't channeled Harry Truman. Now, how did you channel Lyndon Johnson? Let's look at all those morons on TV and what they were saying 2 months ago before your victory. 2 months ago, Donald, the Republican Party was finished for a lifetime, driven into various wings, all this and that, and the Democrats were going to reign forever. All those idiots on television, you know, television presenters on the whole are pretty people who read a script and they can read a teleprompter, but you can't accuse them of original thought because they didn't have a clue how smart you are. The Republican Party was finished 2 months ago. Hillary was going to win. You beat the bookies, Donald. There wasn't a bookie in the world that had you as favourite. The same way that Brexit beat the bookies in Britain because it was another bottom-up movement. Now, you've changed the world already because what you've done, you've said all those come-by things like the United Nations, the League of Nations, imposing these bureaucratic top-heavy structures on people is over. And it is over, Donald. Believe you me, we all know it's over. Now, what you've done since you've won is exactly what Lyndon Johnson would have done. Now let's have the best Lyndon Johnson story. Lyndon Johnson was asked to fire J. Edgar Hoover Because J. Edgar Hoover had run the FBI forever, and also he was a true paranoid, which is pretty smart for a leader, and he had reputedly some very salacious material on the Kennedy boys, well, President Kennedy, and also some very salacious material apparently on Martin Luther King, that hero of most Americans. And all his urges and advisors were advising Lyndon Johnson to kick him out. And Lyndon Johnson said, I'd rather have him inside the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in. Now, how did you channel Lyndon Johnson? As soon as the election was over, you settled things down. You calmed the nation. Lyndon Johnson was a great domestic president. Right during the end of President Obama's presidency, what a bad look for the world. Trashing your inner cities, all that stuff. Places on fire, cops fighting people, firebombs, babies being killed by stray bullets from gangsters' guns in the inner cities. Dreadful stuff. You seem to have calmed it down, which is a very Lyndon Johnson thing to have done. And also, the old saying is you keep your enemies close and your friends even closer. Mitt Romney, whom I always thought was pretty smart, was really stupid going out on a limb, offering vehement criticism of you, which meant he's not an analytical thinker, he's an emotional thinker. You brought him in and you talked to him as if he could be the Secretary of State. I don't think you did that for nasty reason. I think you did that to soothe the troubled waters. And you took that lovely Nikki Haley, who made all appalling criticisms of you, very good governor she was apparently, and you've given her the job as ambassador to the United Nations. So what you've done, you've healed the divisions in the Republican Party. And what's the outcome? You control the House of Reps, you control the Senate, you've got the presidency. The United States has never been in better shape for 90 years, since the 1920s. And the Democratic Party, which all your dim-witted media support, has never been in such bad disarray. So don't take any notice of those media people, Donald. They're as thick as bricks. We won't discuss Mr. Obama too much here. After all, later on maybe, but the historians are going to tear him apart. When you look at the Democratic Party and Mr. Obama's effect on it, it's like that movie, you know, Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. I mean, it's never been in a worse state. It used to be a broad party for everyone in the United States, for the working man. Now it's the American Grievance Party. You know, it's just for blacks if they feel bad, or Hispanics, or LGBTIs. Why don't you put S on the end? How about straights? But the Democratic Party's in terrible straits. By the way, round one in your big fight is going to be international peace. We'll knock that one over pretty quickly. That'll be an early Mike Tyson fight. We want you to win 52 states next time. We're just going to clean up your opposition in the US. That'll be like Marciano, you know, 49 wins, 49 victories. And Marciano never took a backward step. Donald, that's your future. But firstly, let's discuss the immediate things. Let's call it, you've been so good on The Apprentice, how about we do an Aussie-fied makeover show, right? Okay, that's Lyndon Johnson. Now, we want you study the American president. You've got heaps of brilliant people there. 20 minutes, half an hour a day, because we want you to make some headland speeches to show how smart you are. And in those speeches, we want you to convey the romance and the excitement of America as a nation, and the romance and the excitement of those extraordinary men who've been presidents the whole way through. Because part of your function is to be a lyrical orator. Read Churchill's speeches, get some brilliant actor to teach you the cadences and all that sort of thing. Why not? You're one of the most effective communicators you've seen, but you can be better. Righto. Now, here also is part of your makeover. Donald, you portray yourself and everyone else does as this brash billionaire. I'm rich, I'm rich, I'm rich. Donald, Get over yourself. There's 600 billionaires in the States and about 2,000 billionaires worldwide. You're not in the hardest job to win in the world and the hardest job to do. You're not in it and the world is praying because you're a billionaire. Chuck your Superman suit in the corner. We want to see a bit of Clark Kent, Donald. What we want to see you do is let's see the light and shade in your personality in these speeches. Let's see a bit of humility, humour, self-deprecation, and let's see you show some brilliant strategies, because you and I know America is always at war. It's at war with evil in the world, and it's at war with evil in your own society, because so much what the left wing does is basically evil. Now, you've recently had your 2 children attacked. Excuse me, it's a hot day here today. And the left wing control the narrative, you know. All those funny comedians who are black are allowed to use the N-word. If anyone else uses the N-word, they're totally out of society, lose their jobs whatsoever. The left wing controls the narrative. Because ever since Vietnam, the USA has been using dishonest narratives. Collateral damage means killing the innocent. Quantitative easing means printing money that has no value. So all this crap ordinary people are sick of. They're sick of the president's press secretary telling honeyed lies for him. Now, Donald, read Lyndon Johnson, the best American president ever. I'm going to read you what Harry Truman said, and Harry Truman, once you read his achievements, you'll get on your knee and you'll pray to God that you're half the man he was, because he was the most utterly brilliant president. And he wasn't some pretty boy, he wasn't somebody beloved by the left, he was a very plain-spoken Democrat. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm about to read what happened and what Truman said when his daughter was criticised. His daughter Margaret was a bit of a singer and a bit of a piano player, and some crud called Paul Heumann reviewed her performance in 1950 and said, "Miss Truman is a unique American phenomenon with a pleasant voice of little size and fair quality," damning her with faint praise, of course. "She cannot sing very well, is flat a good deal of the time, more last night than at any time we have heard her in past years, has not improved in the years we have heard her, and still cannot sing with anything approaching professional finish." Now, you attacked your son's attackers and your daughter who was attacked on the plane, because these people are really attacking you. Here's Harry Truman's reply, if you haven't read it already. "Mr. Hume," this is the White House, Washington, "Mr. Hume, I've just read your lousy review of Margaret's concert. I've come to the conclusion that you're an 8 ulcer man on 4 ulcer pay. It seems to me you're a frustrated old man who wishes he could have been successful. When you write such poppycock as was in the back section of the paper you work for, it shows conclusively that you're off beam and at least 4 of your ulcers are at work. Someday I hope to meet you." I love this bit. "When that happens, you'll need a new nose, a lot of beefsteak for black eyes, and perhaps a supporter below. Pegler," some columnist, "a gutter snipe, is a gentleman alongside you. I hope you'll accept that statement as a worse insult than a reflection on your ancestry. HST, Harry S. Truman." Now, if he made that speech today, all those dreadful lefties would be jumping up and down. But I just love Harry S. Truman. Please, you're smart. Get someone smart like Newt Gingrich to say you're a buff on the presidency. So when you make your hallmark speeches, you can just refer to previous presidents and the stuff they did. You know, have a look at Theodore Roosevelt and be humble. Have a look at all of them. Then you'll be a learned man. Because when you make your speeches, Donald, we want to see purpose. We want to see a learned man making those speeches. Okay, now, let's get back to what your job is. Your mission statement, your job as President of the US is to fiercely defend the US both nationally and internationally and advance her in any way you can. That's why you need to look outside the box. The only country in the world that's ever reduced welfare in modern times and reduced the bureaucracy is New Zealand. Okay? New Zealand, little New Zealand. Now, Mr. Key, their last president is just, Prime Minister rather, has just left office after 8 years. He started off, a bit of a Bill Clinton story. He started off as a poor kid with a single mother, and he went to some gigantic job with Merrill Lynch. What a trajectory, what talent. And he's the most successful Prime Minister of New Zealand ever. When you've got a burgeoning welfare bill, why would you be using all the fools who failed in the bureaucracy before? Why would you give people like him a job? Open your eyes, Donald. Open your mind. Look around. That's what you've done in business all your life. I'd love to see you do that. Now, let's talk about war and money and what's happened in the past. And what I'm going to do is only refer to actual events that have happened. Okay, let's just take the wars you've been involved in since George Herbert Walker Bush, ex-CIA chief, seasoned man, torpedo bomber pilot who was shot down in World War II, an American hero, and tremendous life experience. When Saddam invaded Kuwait, no cowboy stuff for him. He went to the UN, had a collection of nations beside him, and very quickly, with absolutely minimal casualties, fulfilled the UN Charter. Saddam was back in Iraq, quick smart. If one of your associates reads the book of the Saudi general who was number 2, I think Saudi Arabia provided all the oil for that, and they had a complete military city where Americans and other troops could stay. It cost America a minuscule amount, a few $billion. I think Japan kicked in $12 or $13 billion because they were that oil and they wanted to help. That's George Herbert Walker Bush. Smart man, smart war, did the right thing. Didn't do anything very silly. Now, every US president is a deeply flawed man, but also a deeply brilliant man. If you want to understand the presidents, get one of your smart guys to get a book called The Outsider by Colin Wilson, a 26-year-old British philosopher. This book made his name. The book is all about the man, or woman I suppose too, who feels exceptional, who feels they have some incredible talent or they have a destiny. And although they can do things the way normal things do and play in teams or work in jobs or something, they always feel different. I think every US president is an outsider, and something can be learnt from every one of those presidents. Now, Bill Clinton was the ultimate outsider. From a pretty average background, bags of charm, played the saxophone. When he finished office, the national debt was only 5-point-something trillion, which is terribly high anyway. But he barely increased it. And he led the longest period of economic success in American life. And together with, I think, Newt Gingrich and the Republicans riding shotgun on him, delivered balanced budgets. Also, the war he was involved in when those Serbs, Croats and Muslims were fighting an incredible war in a first world country, when they were blowing each other up. We couldn't believe it in Australia. We've got Serbs and Croats and Muslims here too. They just threw a few Coke cans at each other at a soccer game. They didn't go around shooting each other. Now, what Bill Clinton did, which was brilliant, he bombed the hell out of Serbia. To my memory, didn't put a boot on the ground. War over. Smart work, Bill. We know he's gone a bit rogue lately, Donald, but very smart then. We will then look at the next war the US was involved in. George Bush Jr. A totally unnecessary war against Iraq, who had no mass methods of destruction anyone could have defined. We know they'd gassed the Kurds previously. He pulled this war on when the US and British jets were giving the Kurds protection. When Saddam's fighters saw them, they turned tail and flew over Iran or somewhere because they knew they get shot down. This was the dumbest war America's ever been involved in. You lost thousands of lives, you didn't get any of the oil, and you lost enormous American prestige because you didn't behave like a first world nation. Let me just interject now. Who are the most powerful nations in the world? America is. China is. Russia is too, to a certain extent, because they've got lots of arms. They're great powers. America didn't behave like a great power in that setup, and hasn't behaved like a great power since. Refusing to prosecute wars properly isn't what great powers do. Take a look at China. They've just done what they wanted. They've taken Tibet, said they own it, replacing the Tibetans with Han Chinese. What about world opinion? They don't give a damn. What's world opinion do? Nothing. They've conquered it over a lot of the South China Sea. Missiles everywhere, got the neighbours terrified, and international jurists have said a lot of that territory doesn't belong to you. China just gives them the finger. They're a great power. They behave like a great power, and a great power ruthlessly advantages itself at all times. A couple of years ago, 2-3 years ago, I think 32 Chinese engineers were killed in the Sudan. Did China go to the UN? Not to my knowledge. They just sent 3,000 infantry soldiers in, killed all the bad guys. For all I know, they're still there. That's what a great power does. Now, Vladimir Putin behaves like a great power does. What he's trying to do, is what we'd like to see you do, is put the band back together again. You know, like the Blues Brothers? Okay. Look at the Obama era. Look at what Putin has done. Putting that lovely Mr. Obama in with Putin is like putting Woody Allen in with the young Mike Tyson. What's Putin done? What's he trying to do? He said what he's trying to do. He said the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century was the breakup of the Soviet Union. Yeah? Some people say it was nuclear weapons. In many ways it was the pill, but I won't go into that right now. But that's what he said. And what's he done in the Obama era? He's grabbed oil leases in the Arctic. He's pinched back Crimea, which Brezhnev, that drunken Brezhnev, gave to Ukraine 40 years ago. He's got his military port back in Crimea. In Syria, he's got his warm water pack port there. He's killed a squillion people. Terrible stuff in Syria, in Aleppo. And Assad's still in. Vlad's had a big win. Now, he's acting like a great power. But the solution we have for you, that will put you on the pantheon of great American presidents, will not only benefit America and its allies, it will benefit Russia and China too. It will benefit all but the two most rogue nations in the world, to which it will do terrible things. Now, let us move on further. All right. You're the president-elect? Okay. Let us look at a rearrangement of the world with the US as its primary power. Now, we'll look at the international scene and your enemies. All your enemies are in the UN. Russia's not your enemy. Mr. Putin's like a giant python that just swallowed a lot. And his is the 12th biggest economy in the world. Yours is the first. The 13th biggest is Australia. And with the price of Bill Gates' house would probably be the same as Russia. If you add New Zealand in, we're a bigger combined economy than Russia. There's towing warships around the place, firing guns around. There's nothing to do than go to war. I'm sure Mr. Putin is really pulling for you to succeed. And why all your morons in Washington saying he's going to pull a war on? Hey, he's the smartest guy in the world. Why is he going to face annihilation? Don't be stupid. And China, they're all going on about China. Every crisis is an opportunity. What China's doing is going to make the new plan we give you much, much easier. Because China's A, frightening the hell out of the neighbours, behaving like a great power, and B, Donald, you've been in business a long time. If you do a project and someone else loans you billions of dollars, who's got the ulcer? Who's got the heartache? Not you. You can just go bankrupt. It's your lender. He can do his ass. He can lose all his money. Right. So China would be praying for you to succeed. If the US economy booms along, China can do what it likes with its currency. It can sell you more stuff. China's pulling for you to succeed, I'm sure. I couldn't imagine someone as clever as the Chinese government, if they haven't studied what the US does as in World War II, when it's stirred up. After all, Donald, China has one aircraft carrier and you have 11. Okay, so let's just leave that by the by. Your biggest enemies are in the UN. And your biggest enemy is the sclerotic bureaucracy in the UN. You said the League of Nations was this come by a peace and love thing for all the nations in the world. It failed. Excuse me, it's a bit of a hot day. It failed and World War II started. Okay. The United Nations is another come by from the top down. Actually started by Harry Truman. Of course, I say he was a brilliant, with great hopes after World War II. He was a brilliant politician. What's it turned out to be? It turns out to be the place where the nations of the West, all the decent nations, get kicked in the nuts all the time and pay for it. Donald, they're your enemy. That sclerotic bureaucracy in the United Nations is your enemy. Leave that poor Nikki Haley the talk shop. Look at the United Nations. It was originally a beautiful house. And now, you stick your finger in the wall and there's all white ants. And you look at the Committee for Freedom in the World. It's got nations on it. It behead people and have secret police and all that. And they all outgun you there. There's only about 6 or 7 goody decent nations on it. And what's it produce? About 80 resolutions a year condemning Israel, the only democracy. Donald, okay, let's go on a journey together. This is your Aussie makeover team. We're going into the jungle together with our troops. Now, we're going to leave the UN. Leave it alone. Let them keep talking there. Let Russia, let China, let all those scumbag nations who take your money and then vote against you, leave them alone. Because they're not your team, Donald. They're not your team. Now, let's look at money and let's look at freedom internationally, because just like Make America Great Again, let's unlock the same energy internationally. Let's make the free world really free for the first time, free of war. Okay, now, the biggest and stupidest mistake the United States has made since World War II is pretending it's leader of the whole world. No, you're not Donald. You're leader of the free world. Okay? Now, and all you have to do, like the Blues Brothers, is put the team back together again. The World War II team, plus, as with the Demtel ad, plus others. All right, now, let us go back to the clans, to the Highlands. Let us divide, and this is from Freedom House, the American Klan Go established by Eleanor Roosevelt and Wendell Willkie. They divide the world into nations in 3 categories. The free, the totally free. There are 44 of them, there were 46 10 years ago. Freedom's slipping a bit. Democracy is a very fragile flower, Donald. And it's your job as the most powerful man in the world to nurture it, to water it, to make it strong again. And if you do this, you're going to be the 4th greatest president, or one of the 4 greatest presidents of all time. Because the other presidents, the brilliant presidents, George Washington, the split from Britain, Lincoln freeing the slaves, the incomparable FDR with all the building for unemployed people in the 30s and the way he conducted the war in the 40s, incomparable. But they were different men, they were different times. And you're a modern man, well, you're a very modern man. So why would you be conducting the foreign affairs, the diplomatic relationships of America in the way they did 50 or 100 or 200 years ago? Answer, you wouldn't. Okay, now, the nations are divided at the moment, according to Freedom House. There are 44 totally free nations, just like you, Britain, Australia, Canada, right? All the EU nations, okay? Then there's the partially free nations, and then there's the totally unfree nations. Now, for years, the US and all you well-intentioned people have been fools. You've been giving squillions of dollars to the unfree nations who vote against you, or the partially free nations. The money just goes ding, crooked nation, ding, Swiss bank. Doesn't get the poor people. A lot of nonsense, Donald. Here's how you beat it. You've been whinging that Europe doesn't pull its share in NATO. Forget all that stuff. That's old hat. I believe Vladimir Putin refers to the leaders of the EU as the hamsters. I've no idea what he calls Mr. Obama, President Obama, sorry. But all you have to do is ignore the others. They've got the United Nations. Now, this new association we're forming has nothing to do with the UN, Donald. And it can't offend anyone. All you do, it's as cheap as chips, you're always boasting about bringing projects in under budget and on time. How much is this going to cost, huh? You just get the 44 truly free nations in the world. Now, you're not going to disturb, sure you've got alliances with us or Canada or Holland or whatever, it doesn't matter. You put the 44 nations together and you say, this is the new alliance that we, the United States, are the most powerful nation in the world, wants to form. It's not directed against any other nation. It's for us, because we are the 44 freest nations in the world. And what we want to form is the Free Nations Defence Pact. And hear how it's going to work. This is where America behaves like the world's leading great power. You say, we're the first nation, we're primus inter pares, first amongst equals, but from us right down to the smallest democracy in the world, 10,000 people in the Pacific, we all have equal rights and equal obligations. Our rights are freedom from aggression from any other power in the world. You don't even have to mention the 44 free nations, because to my knowledge, since World War II, no social democracy, not socialist democracy, social democracy is one where the citizens are free and all citizens are treated as equally as possible. Any civic student will tell anyone what a social democracy is. And then you will be truly free, because they'll all have the same rights. Freedom from attack. Now, let's look at Aesop's fables, Donald. What you're doing is showing you're a brilliant long-term thinker. Now, what you're doing with Mad Dog and people is great. Upping the US fleet to 350 ships, good stuff. Upping the US Army, great stuff. Improving the US Air Force, wonderful. Having a good look at your nuclear armoury and making sure it's not a bunch of rusty old nukes, but nukes that you will never ever have to use under the plan that we're giving you. This is all good stuff, Donald, but it's temporary. You've only got to have another loopy left-wing president who opens the borders again, or says, come by, we don't need all these arms, because you've just inherited a demoralised US Defence Force down at the lowest level, I think, than World War II, from what I've read. So what you're doing now is temporarily good, but it's not permanently good. And this is where we think this plan is brilliant. Now, the rights of all these, down to the smallest democracy, are freedom from invasion from an aggressor. Okay? Here are the responsibilities, and this is the one that really will work. Now, let's look at money and war. In the 19th century, there was an incredible family called the Rothschilds. There was an English and a French branch. Excuse me, a wonderful book called The Rise of the Rothschilds. Now, the Rothschilds were the biggest financiers in Europe. They had a full symphony orchestra at home, I think both the British and the French branch, just for a little light narc music, okay? But there was a war brewing in Europe. I think it was between France and Holland, but I'm not quite sure. Anyway, the Rothschilds refused to finance either side, and there was no war. Now, let us talk about economic levers. Firstly, there is nothing more expensive than going to war. FDR spent incredible money to run World War II. He had to. He had his back to the wall. Now, this is going to cost you damn all. Now, the obligations of the 44 nations are these. If an aggressor attacks one of them, they have 48 hours or 24 hours to withdraw, or one, their currency is frozen worldwide. Two, any assets held in the 44 leading nations, and the 44 leading nations would be 60% of the world's assets, maybe more. Any assets, any business they have is frozen. Their passports aren't recognised in the 44 leading nations of the world. They can't land their planes. They can't, poorest countries in the world, to conduct small businesses from home. That's part of the enormous good that America has done in the world. Today I'm not going to enunciate all the good things America has done, but we know what they are. All right, now we're going to talk about defence. The number one job of any US president is to fiercely defend the citizens of his own country and to fiercely defend the citizens of the free world. Frankly, as Rhett Butler said in Gone with the Wind, my dear, I don't give a damn. I don't give a damn what the unfree and the evil nations in the world do. Here's what the free nations in the world are going to do. Now, America has been devastated by the wars we have recently undergone. And America has paid an enormous price in World War II and World War I, and Korea and Vietnam. But we still are the hope of the world. Now, as you know, we're increasing our army, our navy, our air force, because they've been badly run down. That makes us unchallenged the mightiest nation the world has ever seen. But as the president, and what is my philosophy? I'm a conservative. What does a conservative do? He knows the past. He takes the best from the past to use in the present. He knows and understands the present, and he uses the best in the present to make for a bright and glowing future. So here's what our plan is. America has stood on its own. America has paid enormous bloodshed, while many other nations have shirked their responsibility. That game is over. I would like you to think of Aesop's fables, where the wise old father has a bundle of sticks and he gets his sons all quarrelling to try and break them, and they can't. He then undoes the bundle, gives them individual sticks, and they break them. And they can easily. No one nation can stand against the world, not even America. Nor can China, nor can any other great nation. But what we aim to do is not just be the most powerful nation now, we need to look to the future. Because in the future, and my primary purpose is to defend America now and in the future, some loofy, left-wing, goofy president may well run our armed forces down, open our borders up again. Terrible stuff. Okay? Here's what we're going to do. We're inviting the 44 first world nations, our best friends, and they're about 60% of the world's economy, to a conference in America. And what we're going to do, remember, no social democracy since World War II has ever attacked any other social democracy. We're going to leave the non-free and the partially free nations. They have the United Nations. This is a totally different free nations of the world defence pact. Now, every one of those 44 nations is going to have the same rights. It's also going to have the same responsibility. Its rights are immediately it's attacked to be supported by the other 43 nations. Here are the responsibilities of these nations. If an aggressor attacks any of the 44 nations, here is what happens. Their currency is immediately frozen in 44 nations. Any business is frozen. Any assets they have are frozen. Their planes aren't allowed to land. Their ships aren't allowed to dock. Their trains aren't allowed into stations. Any of those three that are here will be sent home in all the 44 nations, given fuel. We won't be holding hostages or any nonsense like that. They can go where they like, but they won't be resupplied. Now, these restrictions will continue to apply. If possible, we'll block their internet access. What we intend to do with any criminal aggressor nation is to make it the pariah nation of the world. That nation will have 48 hours to withdraw. Now, when it withdraws, the sanctions will stay on until a committee of the free nations decides what reparations are made to one of the 44 nations that's been injured. And until that money is paid in full, and that money will be taken from the cash and assets held in the 44 nations, the sanctions will last. This means we don't lose a soldier, a sailor, or an airman defending freedom in the world. This means that all the free nations can relax a bit. It will unlock enormous energy in the free nations. Finally, they're with their own people. Finally. Of course, probably they'll want to discuss other things. That's all in the future. But you can see what a brilliant start this is. Now, just the same as we're building a wall to define our nation, and any nation that doesn't have borders isn't a nation at all. Every other country in the world has borders. It's been sheer idiocy for the United States not to have borders. What we're doing with our new plan, which looks ahead 100 years or more, is to put a virtual wall around the free nations of the world at an absolutely minimal cost. We'll have an old army base or a resort somewhere in the east coast of America, which will be used, it'll cost peanuts, which the free nations of the world can discuss to discuss all their mutual problems. Now, what the unfree nations of the world do, we don't give a damn. Thank you very much. What I will be proposing in other speeches is my vision for America and our party's vision for America. Because when you give someone a job, you look at their CV. And my CV, I'm a builder, I'm a developer. And we're artists. All those silly, brain-dead artists in Hollywood have gone berserk because they're not very intelligent. Because what is a developer? He's a physical artist. He sees a piece of land, he puts lawns and jungle and gardens and buildings on it. He has visions. To the citizens of the USA and to the citizens of the world, this is Donald Trump President of the USA. This is what I plan to do for world peace. Thank you very much indeed. Well, I'm off to have a cup of tea with my mates. Thanks for listening to it. We think it's a great plan. Why don't you have a look at it? I can't see one reason in the world, Donald, why the country that put a man on the moon 12 years after Sputnik, the country that developed the internet, why the world's the most leading, exciting, innovative country in the world can't do this. Thanks very much. We'll give you a hand with your other Vanguard speeches later on. Bye. This is Swill Team number 4 signing off.